Now, welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with David Earl, the gentleman who came up with the concept of Tony at 12. Today, we're going to take a look at the Crown Dependencies and following World War II, Guernsey's closer involvement with Alderney by way of the 1948 agreement. David, good to see you.
Morning, Tony. Nice to see you too.
Tell us all about the Crown Dependencies. What are they?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. In the Kilbrandon report, which was published in 1973, I'm going to read it to you. It describes the system of government in the Channel Islands as unique and not capable of description by any of the usual categories of political science. And it goes on to say, in some respects, that's the Channel Islands, are like miniature states with wide powers of self-government. Does that answer your question?
I think that gives us a pretty good insight into where we're going on this one. Of course, the thing is that we sort of go back to the Norman times, and just after that, of course, England had quite a big interest in France, didn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it was the Norman conquest that really led to the situation that we have. The Channel Islands, of course, used to belong to the Duke of Normandy. And when he became the King of England, then he brought the Channel Islands into the fold.
Mm. And apparently it all goes back to 1204, doesn't it? When they
that's
when a negotiation
right.
took place. And of course, included in that is the Isle of Man.
That's right. I mean, the Crown Dependencies are officially the bailiwick of Jersey, the bailiwick of Guernsey, which includes Alderney and Sark, and, as you quite rightly say, the Isle of Man. Now, the interesting thing is that they go back many years, but certainly as far as Guernsey is concerned, I did a little bit of research on this, and in the 15th century, 15th, 16th century, there were a number of charters that were royal charters that were enacted. The first one by Queen Elizabeth, which basically provided the foundations for the bailiwick of Guernsey as we know it today, and its legal and political status.
Can we take it, David, that Alderney is a separate Crown dependency, or because of the fact it's rolled in with Guernsey, it's just part of the bailiwick?
Officially at the moment, and there's a publication that was very recently published by the House of Commons Library, and that describes the Crown dependencies, as I've just said, as the bailiwick of Jersey, the bailiwick of Guernsey, and the Isle of Man. It's difficult to know because there is nothing in writing that sets out the status of the Channel Islands. Absolutely nothing. Even the term bailiwick has no meaning. There is no legal status to the term bailiwick. It just means a collection of land, an area. It's become used or abused possibly as a collective term for the islands of Guernsey.
I mean, I suppose you could argue that as Alderney has its own law, it's slightly different to Sark, for example.
Yes, I personally, and this is a personal view, is that up until the Second World War, the Guernsey, Jersey, Alderney, and Sark were essentially independent entities. And it's only since the Second World War that they've really become the units that they are today.
And we're not to sort of confuse this with Gibraltar, for example, which is a British overseas territory. Presumably the UK have a bit more say, do they, on a British overseas territory than they do with the Crown dependencies?
Absolutely. Yes, they do. Classic example is Gibraltar, and there are dozens scattered all over the globe. But the Crown dependencies are unique. They belong to King Charles III now.
Okay, who is also the Duke of Normandy.
Yes, he is. Well, we call him the Duke of Normandy, and interestingly, in the Isle of Man, they call him the Lord of Man.
Mm.
You didn't know that, did you?
I didn't know that, and I'm very pleased you threw that one in, David, because it's all, adds to my headification. Now, of course, the English Civil War, when Charles I was deposed, put Jersey on one side and Guernsey on the other. Do you think
Yes, it did.
there's always been a little bit of animosity between the two? Do you think the animosity was there before the English Civil War, or it crystallized with the English Civil War?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer. I mean, I think the word volatile is quite interesting. As you quite rightly said, they were on different sides. The Jersey was on the side of the Royalists, and Guernsey was on the side of the parliamentarians. And eventually, of course, the Royalists were in the ascendancy, so they all ended up belonging to the Crown. That's
Yeah.
as simple as that.
Yeah. Now, let's look at the situation regarding legislation that either Jersey or Guernsey passes. And I believe it has to be reviewed by the Ministry of Justice.
That is indeed correct. I mean, basically, we belong to the Crown, but he delegates that to Privy Council, who in turn delegate it to the Ministry of Justice. And any legislation that's enacted in Jersey, Guernsey, or Alderney has to receive royal assent, but it has to go through those or jump across those hoops of the Ministry of Jersey, Minister of Justice, and the Privy Council before they recommend that the King, now I have to get used to this, actually signs the royal assent.
And we see still a certain amount of UK control by way of the fact that the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council is the highest court of appeal. So any legal case that takes place in Jersey or Guernsey can find its way to the Privy Council, who will be the ultimate adjudicators.
That's absolutely right. I mean, you can still go to the High Court in the UK for justice if you believe you didn't get it in either of the two bailiwicks or the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
It's interesting what I don't know if you're going to come on to this, but I'm going to read this bit to you. Although self-governing, the UK Parliament can legislate for the Crown Dependencies in the areas of defence, nationality, citizenship, succession to the throne, so it's very topical, extradition, and would you believe, broadcasting, by implication, limiting the competence of the island jurisdictions in these areas. I thought that was rather good.
I think that's rather good. So effectively, they still have a little bit of an arrangement there. And of course, taking it a little stage further, the Isle of Man went a bit further and got involved with a revenue sharing agreement with the UK, whereby I think they sort of bat and ball the VAT and stuff like that around.
Yeah, the Isle of Man has VAT, whereas we don't actually have anything. Jersey, of course, has sales tax, and well, that's another story, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll have to do that at some later stage, David. So there we are. The Crown Dependencies and good government. There was a lot of criticism about Sark a few years ago. Some people say it also applies to Alderney. What's your spin on that one?
Well, certainly Sark was in a difficult situation. It was the only feudal state left in the world. And from what I heard, most of the islanders were happy to leave it the way it was. But correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that the Berkeley brothers, when they bought Brecqhou, were concerned that inheritance laws in Sark were feudal, and therefore everything went to the firstborn son, then the second son, and they only had daughters. So they were unhappy about this and made some waves, which ended up with a difficult situation, which I don't think has really been resolved yet. As for here, well, that's another story. Perhaps we defer that to another day too, Tony.
Let's get on to the 1948 agreement, because we hear a lot about it. And, you know, for our viewers who aren't resident in the bailiwick of Guernsey, just explain basically what it was all about immediately after World War II, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you probably are aware, I think most people are aware, the island was in a mess after the Second World War. It was um, a rat-infested rock. It needed a huge amount doing to it. Before the war, of course, it was very much an agricultural community. And what is interesting is that immediately after the war, in the first year after the islands were liberated, only 75% of the people had returned to the island, and the income that the island received was around £13,000 a year. Now, obviously, that's a lot more in today's money, but it's still a relatively small amount of the government, by which time this was a Labour-controlled government, and they basically, we had I've got to just check this, basically in 1947, the chairman of the Privy Council, chaired by the Home Secretary, the Right Honourable James Chutter, he don't have to excuse the sound effects there, was appointed to inquire into the state of Alderney, its government, its relationship with the neighbouring islands, its financial position, and its system of land tenure and its economic prospects. It concluded that the island's administration was not in a position to provide the minimum standards which are regarded as essential in a present-day community, or cope with the many complex problems which it would have to deal with in the years immediately ahead. Now, I'm quoting that from the records, obviously, but it pretty well sums up the situation. Now, what's interesting is they concluded that Alderney becoming a parish of Guernsey wasn't the way forward, but Chutter Eade, who, as I said, was the Home Secretary at the time, basically advocated, and I use his words, the Guernseyfication of the island, which has or perhaps hasn't happened. So maybe it's something that should happen. Certainly, when I listen to people's comments on the street, there is an increasing number of people who say, oh, we should be a parish of Guernsey. Well, I don't think we'll ever be a parish of Guernsey, because I don't think that relationship is on offer. But certainly a closer relationship, yeah, that's certainly possible.
I suppose the alternative at that time would be for Alderney to have perhaps teamed up with the Isle of Wight and Hampshire.
Yeah.
Was
Jersey.
there any?
Yeah,
or Jersey. I mean, did the people have any choice in it, or did the Home Secretary decide that Guernsey should take on the role, and came up with the agreement?
I think it was the States of Alderney that made the decision. I'm not absolutely certain. I don't think the Home Secretary had anything to do with it. Basically, the States of Alderney were given three options, which was Jersey, Guernsey, or, as you say, the Isle of Wight, or indeed Hampshire, which would be Hampshire in reality.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, presumably the Home Office said to Guernsey, right, this is what you've got to do. And the deal basically, as I understand it, David, was that all of the tax and other government levies that were derived from Alderney would go to Guernsey, and Guernsey in return would provide certain services, which are called the transfer services, in return for these payments. That's still the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's slightly more complex than that. Chutter Eade made 2 visits to Alderney, and on the second one, he actually stayed overnight, which was very brave of him. Basically, it was in the UK's government's interest to do a deal with Guernsey. And I suspect the deal was done with Guernsey and then it was sold to the States of Alderney. But it was put to the States of Alderney that they should go along to see the deputies in Guernsey and ask for help. But I think the deal had already been done. As you quite rightly say, the deal was that Guernsey would provide a number of transferred services, and I've got a list of the ones that we currently have. There've been a number of changes over the years, but there's just 8 of them. Adoption, the airfield, very contentious, childcare services, education, health services, another contentious item, immigration, police, and social services. They are the 8 transferred services that we currently have today.
Okay. Now, they state that we are running at a deficit, Alderney, in terms of what we need and what we actually earn. And I think for 2021, it was around about £8 million. Is that correct?
The deficit was £8,400,000. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, to put that into perspective, and this is according to the analysis of income and expenditure attributable to Alderney for the financial year 2021. The bottom line is that the income that they received from tax and everything else was £10,034,000, but expenditure was £80,434,000, which leaves the net deficit of £8,400,000.
So we are indebted to Guernsey in that particular year for that amount.
Absolutely. And it's been steadily rising. It's not static, it's not declining. It is, if you look at the average, it is a cumulative average. It is starting to increase. Well, not starting, it has been increasing ever since the figures were made available, which was 2016.
I mean, two reasons why it went into decline were, first of all, Lloyd's of London. There are a lot of Lloyd's names here that were making contributions to Guernsey income tax. And the second thing is, of course, that interest rates went down to virtually zilch. So the taxman wasn't going to collect much in terms of the tax take on interest.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The Lloyd's crash was probably the most pivotal thing since the agreement with Guernsey actually began it's actually on the 1st of January 1949. The Lloyd's crash, there were a number of Lloyd's numbers, is it, or members? I can never remember
names.
What it is.
Names.
That's the one. Yeah, there were a number of Lloyd's names living here on the island. I won't mention names, but a lot of them lost their shirts. And up until that point, interestingly, and a lot of people don't know this, is that Alderney was certainly in a break-even situation with Guernsey, if not possibly paying slightly more in tax than we were getting in terms of transferred services. Now, that all changed in the early 1990s when the Lloyd's crash came along. And at that point, it was decided, and this is interesting, it was decided that Guernsey, with the assistance of the States of Alderney, would actually hide any deficit. In other words, what they were going to do is combine all of the figures together as a bailiwick rather than have separate figures for Alderney. And that meant that no one could consider that there was anything divisive going on. And it all went very happily then for a while until 2015, when do you remember the Golden Visa saga?
Yes. Tell the viewers a bit more about it.
Well, in 2015, and I shan't mention names, but a certain company came along for a meeting with the States of Alderney, promising them millions, in fact, tens of millions of pounds of income per year from selling, or selling is probably as good a word as any, these golden visas. Now, basically, the visas were entry into the UK, which ultimately could lead to the beneficiary getting a UK passport. But I'm told it was sold mainly on the idea that the children of wealthy Middle East and Asian individuals, high net worth individuals, could have access to the UK for education and for other purposes. But, you can leave that to yourself. The essence of it was you had to put £1 million on deposit in a Alderney piggy bank and pay various fees and bits and pieces. Now, the potential of that was that Alderney could go its own. It could declare UDI. It could cut the shackles to Guernsey. So for a number of politicians, it was a very attractive deal. The likelihood of it ever happening were nil, in my opinion. I mean, first of all, you'd have to get the approval of Guernsey. Then, of course, you'd have to get to the approval of the UK, who had their own schemes and probably wouldn't want Alderney muddying the water. But that's the situation. Now, as a result of that, and this is where it gets super interesting, is that the people concerned wanted to know how much it cost to run the island.
Right.
And I remember certain Alderney States members asking me if I had any ideas. Basically, at the end of the day, they went to Guernsey cap in hand and said, look, in the interest of transparency, we would like to know how much it actually costs to provide the 8 transferred services, which I listed earlier. And Guernsey went, okay, that sounds reasonable. But what happened, and this is particularly the poignant part, is that Guernsey, not only did they, I'll read it out to you, but the Guernsey were asked to provide their best estimate figures for the income derived from sources based in Alderney, as well as expenditure incurred from the Guernsey budget on public services provided for Alderney. Policy and Resources did exactly that. They charged every department with actually coming up with the best estimate of how much it cost to provide services in Alderney. And that's where the transferred service agreement, in my opinion, went out of the window. That was in 2016. And, the whole thing was that, we ended up with a situation where you had things like contributions to overseas aid suddenly appearing in the accounts. Now, this information is all in the public domain. The latest information is for 2021. We haven't got the 2000. They'll come out in May, I think. They'll come out. But if we run through this, and I hope you don't mind me doing this, but
please do.
What I calculated, and I've done a lot of research over the last few years into the transferred service agreement, and basically, whilst there are no figures actually defining the cost of each transferred service, what I did was to estimate, or use the terms of Guernsey, make a best estimate of actually how much it cost. And the cost is, in my opinion, £9.5 million. Now, you will say to me, well, actually, Guernsey estimate the cost of the transferred services to be 12.5 million. What's the difference? Well, the fact is, we've ended up with various new non-transferred services like corporate services, 500,000, Committee for Economic Development, and which is 60,000, and then you've got Committee for Employment and Social Security, the Committee for the Environment and Infrastructure, they actually charge us sort of £500,000 for the maintenance of the Alderney breakwater, which, as you probably appreciate, is Guernsey's contribution to the defence of the realm after the Falklands War. You know, it's nothing to do with Alderney, but yeah, it's
anything they could
Alderney.
find, anything they could find, they threw in.
Well, I'm not going to say that, but
well, I have.
Yes, I can't possibly comment. And then you've got policy and resources, £250,000, scrutiny management, 15,000, and then nearly 400,000 for law officers. You know, that all adds up to nearly 3 million.
So this idea about sending it down to the law officers and there's no charge is a load of rot.
Oh, it's absolutely. You know, the second they're like all lawyers. You know, they have a
they have
like
the meter.
Drivers, they have a meter.
Yeah, they have the meter running. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all very interesting. Alderney obviously couldn't go its own way, could it? There are too many bits and pieces to think. No. But on a brighter side, the States of Alderney recently issued a report giving updates on GDP. Now, if I was looking at it from the outside, I'd move here tomorrow.
Well, absolutely. It looks
so healthy. Tell us a bit about it, please.
Well, I think most countries would be happy with, 6 million increase in GDP. I think they'd say that was exceptional. Have you actually read the briefing document that this press release originated from?
Not the briefing document, only the press release.
Oh, well, I have, and it's quite interesting. Yes, certainly, I've got it here in front of me, and certainly, the figures are, it does turn out at 16%. But we're talking about a period, a 3-year period, starting in 2019 and ending in 2021. Now, so there's no benchmark in these figures. Secondly, 2020 was on the 24th of March 2020, we began the lockdown.
Yeah.
Then in 2021, something happened, which I think is probably the best thing that has happened to Alderney economically since the war, and that was staycation.
Yeah.
It had a tremendous impact, and that has certainly increased it. I mean, it went up from 22,765,000 to 25. That's per capita. That's per head of population. So you're really rich, Tony. I wish. And
so are you, David.
Well, I wish I was.
But I mean, it's the old story, isn't it? With figures, you can play around with them and you can make them do anything. But in truth, in the real world, it's a little bit of pie in the sky, surely, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. It is meaningless. I mean, I'm not going to go into what GDP and GVA and market price and all the other GVA market is, but if you actually scan down the GVA figures, there's nothing really stunning. The highest single figure is public administration and trading bodies. So that's certainly where a lot of our money goes.
But they don't create wealth.
No, they don't. I mean, it will be interesting to see what the figures for 2022 and subsequently 2023 are. I mean, this only started. This is the first report, and they do describe this. If I can find the words, they say GDP for 2019, 2020, and 2021 are estimates only, and they talk about nominal terms. This is a good guess.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah. Right. Well, what can I say to that? Apart from the fact that viewers, he's now got to go off and actually do a bit of a piece for ITV on an unexploded bomb.
No, it's an unexploded maritime flare, which was found on Corblett's Beach, and somebody very bravely carried up the steps and left it at the top. And I'm about to dash down there because the bomb disposal experts are coming over from Guernsey to detonate it.
Okay, well, with that, we'd better let you go. But before you go, can I say thank you very, very much? It's been most interesting having a chat about this. This is something that we've been meaning to do for a little while, and we've got that one off our chests.
Tony, thank you very much indeed. And I apologize for the pregnant pause earlier on while I got my thoughts together. I was still thinking about unexploded bombs.
Well, look, make sure you wear a crash helmet. Take care. Thanks ever so.
Bye, Tony.
Bye, David.